Hey folks, this is Steve Bradley, God's Wordsmith, and today in Luke 10, we're going to be discussing you and your neighbor and priorities. I'm going to combine both because it just fits that way. So here we go. And behold, we read, a certain lawyer stood up and tested him, saying, Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Wrong question, actually. Who shall I believe in to inherit eternal life is the question. But this is what the teacher asked. Our lawyer asked. Jesus said to him, What is written in the law? What is your reading of it? So the lawyer answered and said, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus said to him, You've answered rightly. Do this and you shall live. But he, he, wanting to justify himself, said to Jesus, Well, who is my neighbor? Then Jesus answered and said, and this is such a wonderful story. A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. So he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. On the next day, when he departed, he took out 2 denarii, 2 days' wages, gave them to the innkeeper, and said to him, Take care of him, and whatever more you spend when I come again, I will repay you. So, which of these three do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And the lawyer said, Well, he who showed mercy. Then Jesus said to him, Go and do likewise. Now there are two keys to this passage. The first is, What shall I do? And the second is, wanting to justify himself. It's interesting that the lawyer, who knew Jewish law, which was the Old Testament plus all the Jewish writings up to that day, is actually looking to define his responsibility, by which I mean he's trying to narrow it by asking, Who is my neighbor? Jesus responds with, Well, who is not your neighbor? Letting the lawyer know that the neighbor can be anyone depending on your contact with him, not your so-called connection. In other words, neighbor is defined by how you treat someone else, not by your affiliation with him or if he's your friend. Now, this is an interesting definition since it removes your judgment about the quality of the other person and focuses on your reaction. In the parable, that doesn't matter. Essentially, this lawyer had flipped the script on Jesus, and Jesus caught it. He tried to make Jesus identify who he's obligated to love. Jesus flips the script back by letting this man know that he's the neighbor who can help. Who's the neighbor? You are, if you choose to be. Loving your neighbor as yourself has a broad application. Now, I have some caveats about this because I've lived a long time and I've seen a lot of different people and the way they are. Lots of people want help. When I was a pastor many years ago, I pastored a small church and people would come to me asking for help. And a lot of them where people would come again and again asking for more and more help, and you have to decide who to help. Jesus did not help everyone. In fact, he hid from the people who wanted constant help, wanted to make him king after he fed the 5,000 and he healed them. You only sought me because you ate of the loaves and you were filled. John 6:26. Honest Christians run into this quite a bit. There are lots of people, folks, who want you to adopt them, so to speak, and make them your child, and make it your aim to meet their needs continuously because it's the Christian thing to do. No one ever asks why it's the Christian thing to do. And I always feel like asking them, these people who feel like that, well, why don't you help me? I need money. Do you have any? Maybe you should go and earn some so you can give it to me. I am a man who often worked two jobs, the pastorate and something else. I'm a man who worked two jobs almost all his life until I started in lending, and then I didn't need two jobs. I am a man who dealt with lots and lots of people who wanted me to adopt them because it was the Christian thing to do. And it's obvious to me that these people are just lazy. They don't want to work. They don't want to take care of themselves. They don't want to earn anything for themselves. And so, folks, the second item, the second caveat is their legitimate needs. And Jesus' story gives some to us. The Jewish businessman was robbed, left for dead, and probably would have died without the Samaritan's help. So, when someone cannot help himself, or the need is overwhelming, that's when you should be a neighbor and step in. Notice how I said that. You should be a neighbor and step in sometimes. Now, on the other hand, I had a dear friend who was a quadriplegic. She was just the most delightful person. And she was the definition of helpless. She had a wheelchair that was motorized and she had to move around in that wheelchair. She could literally do nothing for herself. She had to have help to do everything. On the other hand, she decided she didn't want to be totally unable to do anything. So she went to college and she got a master's degree in counseling from the local college. And she trained as a counselor so she could help herself. Her name was Sherry, and she taught me a lot just by that simple action. She was unwilling to just be, how shall I say it, a sponge. She was unwilling to do that. She hated that. She wanted to take care of herself. The third thing is that the assistance the Samaritan provided was limited. It was not permanent welfare. Paul wrote later on in Thessalonians, if any will not work, let him not eat. Listen to that word, because if you find someone who doesn't want to do anything for themselves, they need to learn that work is necessary. The Lord told Adam that his whole life, from the point of the fall thereon, was going to be work. That's how it is. When someone cannot help himself, that's a different thing. But someone who just says, oh, I can't work, it's a statement that you don't usually make in a situation where you don't eat if you don't work. Oh, I can't work. Well, then, you can't go shopping. I can't work. Well, then, the refrigerator is empty. I can't work. Well, then you're going to be on the street. And one of the problems with people is we see, for example, we see a lot of homeless, and I have a great deal of sympathy for some of them, but zero for others, because back in the day, a friend of mine decided to quote unquote minister to the homeless. And so we got food because I was helping him. We got food, we got various things, and to try to help them. And the interesting thing was that these homeless people didn't want to help themselves. They wanted us to help them. And I was shocked. I had no idea that this was how it was. Excuse me. Back in the day, I had, after I just moved back to California from Indiana, I had an interesting situation. I found an apartment house which would take kids, which a lot wouldn't in those days. And I put my wife and my three kids at the time into the apartment. And I went and found a job. So I go to the Employment Development Department in California, and I told them I'm here from Indiana without any work. And the guy at the thing said, well, you're going to have to file an unemployment claim on Indiana. And I said, you don't understand. I want a job. I want to work. I want I want to work. The thing that shocked me after I got my job, by the way, was that I found out that I was the only able-bodied man, and there were lots of them in that entire apartment house who had a job. Everyone else was on some kind of public assistance. Please don't be that person. Please don't help that person. Because helping someone who actually can help himself is a terrible, terrible mistake. Having said this, I have to say that you'll notice that the two people who didn't help the businessman were a priest and a Levite, religious people. And that's a point that Jesus makes with some irony, and that the true neighbor was someone who, out of his kindness and humanity, reached out to save the businessman's life, even though in that culture Jews and Samaritans had a great deal of animosity. That is all the way back from the Old Testament times because of their mutual history. And John even comments in John 4:9. He says Jews have no dealings with Samaritans. They regarded them as sort of an underclass. So, folks, if someone needs help, that's one thing. If someone wants help, that may be something else entirely. And you and I need to pay attention to that. Now, here is a short thing about correcting priorities. Now it happened, as we read, as they went, that he entered a certain village, and that village was about 5 miles away from Jerusalem. And a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. Martha, though, was distracted with much serving. You know the kind of person, you want everything perfect and set the table with the best china and set best silverware and the best tablecloth and make the best food. And she approached Jesus and she said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Now, Jesus was sympathetic toward Martha. He understood her. So Martha says, therefore tell her to help me. But Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you're worried and troubled about many things. But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part which will not be taken away from her. So Jesus is actually having a teaching time here. He's teaching his disciples, and Mary is sitting in, and Martha's scurrying around, worried about how the dinner is going to go. And she's begging Jesus, please get her to help me. And his response was, it's not really time for that. Why don't you sit and listen too? So anyway, the way this is often taken is Mary was better than Martha because she prioritized worship over work, or listening to the word over work. And this is an easy mistake to make, but it is a mistake. Now we can tell this is a mistake because Jesus himself prioritized work. His efforts and labor were constant and endless until the very day he was murdered by the Jewish leadership. He relegated his worship and prayer to off times and special times, such as the night and scattered times during the day. What this teaches us is that both are important, but both are important when they are important. Martha, evidently, with her preparations for Jesus' visit, got uptight about the preparations, and she got mad at her sister for not helping her with what she wanted to do. And Jesus, in his normal way of teaching his friends about priorities, gently redirected her. Mary, he says, chose the best. It's not always about worship or work or listening. It's about when those are to be done. As Ecclesiastes tells us, to everything there is a season. So perhaps you're supposed to listen and worship right now, but possibly now is a time of work. And if you don't do it, you're missing out. This also tells us not to substitute one for the other. If it's work time, then do it. If it's listening time, then do that. If it's prayer time, then pray, and so forth. There are some people who are actually led to pray as their main ministry, for example, but then there are others who preach and others who work, setting up chairs, greeting people in church, building. And by building, I mean building a church building or just building, doing actual physical work is a good thing to do. Now, nobody called to do one thing should despise those who do the other. It's not a class issue. It's what you're supposed to be doing right then. It is not better to pray than work if there's work to do. Jesus showed us that in his own life, which definitely had seasons, such as before he was baptized. What did he do before he was baptized? Well, he was a child, he grew up, and then he took Joseph's place as the carpenter and took care of his mother, Mary. This is a lesson not to despise anyone for what they need to do, as well as the importance of fellowship with the Lord when it's time. And sorry for the coughing, folks. For some reason, I have a problem today. But in any event, do not despise people who work. Do not despise people who pray. Do not despise people who preach. If they're called to do what they do, if they're doing what they're supposed to do, it's the right thing for them and for them. May God bless you today in a wonderful, wonderful way. And next time we talk, it'll be on Luke chapter 11. God bless you all. This is Steve Bradley, God's Wordsmith, signing off for today.